Zay? That night, the exile Zay returned to the Commonwealth. She was to be the last. The stars had faded and the cycle of the rites had run its course. She found the Commonwealth in great upheaval. Spurred by the efforts of the 5 liberated exiles, Volfred Sandalwood's revolutionary plan had incited the masses. These exiles in the starless sky portended the return of the scribes. The people surged into the streets, shoulder to shoulder. Led by the 5 exiles, their voices shook the heavens. The leadership of the Commonwealth panicked. No blood was shed that night, and by dawn it was over. The leaders of the Commonwealth had cast themselves back into exile, or joined in this new cause. Thus, in the 838th year, the Commonwealth had fallen. The new Sarian Union declared its sovereignty in the next year. Among the changes its elected leaders ushered in, they vowed never to cast their people into exile, and they abolished the old Commonwealth decree forbidding literacy. Today, we still remember all of this. And we remember the exiles of the downside, whose deeds led to this dawning of our new age, whether they returned or not. After her liberation, Jodariel soon became an icon of the movement that led to the collapse of the Commonwealth and the rise of the Sarian Union. Her horns and stern countenance inspired the people to believe that she was solely a Myr reborn. She became a great if reluctant leader. In the uncertain times that followed, Jodariel's seasoned expertise often came into play in both matters of security and of state. For instance, she conscripted and trained a team of volunteers to public safety. The community did not know what to make of such a cordial bunch at first, but soon came to value their service. They have stood for the people ever since, and we celebrate their founding day each year. She remained close with Hedwyn all through the experience, and they supported each other through the struggles many times. She kept an eye on Zay, who nonetheless demonstrated a surprising knack to get by on her own, though Jodariel was always willing to provide assistance just in case. She continued training on her own, a regimen that grew stricter with each passing year. There were those who sought to train with her, and she sometimes obliged. There remained one other constant in her life. She would always remember her days among the Nightwings, and with fondness for the most part. The Commonwealth had never provided a sense of a home for the one they had called Zay the Poxy, so she was surprised on her return that she was so well treated. She felt uneasy about it, and besides, she knew that she would do her best to fulfill the pledge she had made to her friends. Even she could not have expected the impact she would have had on the events that followed, which gave rise to our Sarian Union. Despite not fitting the image of any of the 8 scribes, Zay nonetheless stood out alongside the others, amid the teeming masses on the night of the scribes' return. She spoke of the scribes with such conviction and sincerity that the scribes were very moved. After the fall of the Commonwealth, there was a renewed interest in the legend of the 8 scribes, and many new interpretations of their histories and teachings. Zay found herself at the center of all of this. Her way of speaking continued to compel a growing audience. She swayed many people from their astralist beliefs. Soon, the 8th word, which has lost favor among the people during the reign of the Commonwealth, sought her out and asked her to formally join, and she did right away. Among her friends, she has always remained close with Tizo, who more so than anyone could always make her laugh. She cited her relationship with Jodariel as the single most important in her life. Jodariel would always provide for her a circumspect perspective and the wisdom of experience. Zay always was devoted to her faith, but more so to her friends. Many people in the Sarian Union cited that her gentle manner and unwavering conviction helped them brave the changing times with courage and with grace. After the rites ended, Pamitha parted ways with the other Nightwings, stating that she needed some time alone. She reappeared sometime after the fall of the Commonwealth, although she expressed mild surprise at the news. She claimed to have no knowledge of what went on, including what role the Highwing remnants had in the events that shaped the world on the other side. For her part, Pamitha feigned little interest, making the point that they were stuck and what happened elsewhere had little to do with them now. Someone with whom she kept in contact was a bog dweller called Big Bertrude. They would discuss all sorts of matters long into the night and sometimes hunt together too. Tamitha never saw her blood sister again, though did hear of her. By some accounts, Tamitha played no small part in the historic last days of the Commonwealth. In turn, Tamitha must have heard something of her blood sister. However, she never responded to Pamitha's attempts to contact her. Tamitha did not expect forgiveness from her at any point. Nonetheless, she kept trying to reach out, she said, to ruffle up her feathers just a bit. Having long since felt that she had no home to call her own, Pamitha continued traveling about the downside. As the tempest swept across the land, changing its features, she found in it a sublime beauty, and in the starless night she could still see just fine. She said such travels tended to remind her of when she was younger and could fly unfettered. Once it became clear to Ignaris that the rites were drawing to a close, he knew that it was time for him and the Temperance to call it quits. But first, he and the Temperance decided to celebrate, and that they did for many nights. The revelry did eventually subside, the exiles parted amicably and went their separate ways. He roamed the downside, then searching for some meaning in his life, sometimes taking odd jobs requiring his brute strength. He never remained alone for very long and took on many lovers in his time, however he sometimes thought about the one he had called Curly Horns and what became of her. Though his glory days as the most powerful conductor of the rites had long since passed, he always enjoyed the fearsome reputation he had cultivated in that time. When Manly Tinderstuff realized the rites had ended and that he no longer could return to the Commonwealth through the ancient means, he was outraged. He cursed the scribe, spewing forth a slew of blasphemy as to be very unbecoming of one of high status and bearing. When at last he calmed himself, he focused all his energies on attempting to find another means of homecoming. He maintained regular contact with his wealthy family on the other side via messenger imp, and used their vast resources to explore other means of escape. He tried using an elaborate police system. He attempted to retrofit a flying black wagon with superior propulsion. He tried an imp raft, a hot air balloon, even prayer. Nothing worked. There was only one way to escape the downside, and now it was gone. Tinderstuff bankrupted his family in the vain attempts. At last, such was his shame that he retreated to the teeming woods of Black Basin, the Cinderroot. There he yet wallows, complaining to his comrades of the chastity who still put up with him, either about his own misfortune or the latest news from the other side. After the cycle of the rites ceased, Witch Udmilde returned to the Flagging Hands region, where she sealed herself within the Pit of Milith. There, even her fellow exiles of the Withdrawn allegedly grew unnerved after a time and left her to her vile work. Sometime later, the Pit of Milith erupted into flame. So intense was the conflagration that it could have been seen all the way from the Jumur Valley. Arson was expected, though the cause was never verified, and many bog dwellers in the region were forced to flee. A tempest blowing from the north finally quenched the flames. When at last the ashes settled and the grounds had cooled, the site of the fire was scarred beyond recognition. No trace of Witch Udmilde could be found. As for the contents of the Pit of Milith, which notably included a profane object thought to be the remains of Yaslak, all of it was gone as well. Back in the Sarian Union, Udmilde's repeated threats of the return of Yaslak were thoroughly investigated, and no credence was found to any of her claims. As the cycle of the rites drew to a close, it grew evident that the chance at freedom from the downside had forever slipped from Dalbert and Almer Oldheart's grasp. Thus, they and the exiles of the Fate returned to Jumur Valley. There they struggled to get by, as exiles of the downside tend to do. Sometime after the rites had ended, the Oldhearts at last heard of the news that the Commonwealth had fallen. This was well after the fact, of course, but it brought old Dalbert great joy. Despite his forthright manner, he had no love for the nation that cast him down along with his son. Dalbert Oldheart passed peacefully in his sleep before the next new moon. In his final days, he implored his son to undertake a pilgrimage to the scribes. Almer never shared his father's view of the scribes, but respected Dalbert's wishes, and so after a period of mourning, Almer began a new journey. Not a day went by that Almer Oldheart did not think of his father, and give thanks to him, and speak to him at morning and at night. Would that the stars yet shone, for surely Dalbert would be there among them, smiling down at his son and watching over him in his skin. After the final liberation rite, Lendl refused to believe that the rites had truly ended. He would sit through night after consecutive night staring into the blackness of the sky, awaiting any kind of sign that he might gain another chance at freedom. No such sign ever came. His fellow accusers started to express concern for him. Survival had become the top priority once liberty had slipped from their grasp. But Lendl dismissed them as weak fools. He insisted rather forcefully that any evening now the stars would shine for him again, and mark the way toward his inevitable freedom. He was, of course, mistaken. The others in his triumvirate were left with little choice but to abandon him. After that, the exile known as Lendl the Liar was never seen again. However, there have been sightings of the bedraggled demon, who wanders the downside and bears Lendl's cruel countenance, suggesting he yet lives. All his life, Sir Deluge had fled from one danger only to find himself facing another. He had escaped the war-torn waters of the Sea Dominion, he had escaped the blood border of the Commonwealth, and now he had escaped the rites. After the rites had ended, many exiles wrapped in the ancient test were crestfallen, as their last chances to return home vanished, along with the stars above. But Deluge did not mind, for this outcome meant that at last there was no burden of responsibility weighing down on him. While most of his fellow exiles of the Pyre hearts yet longed for the waters of the Sea Dominion, driven as ever by their impulses towards conflict, Deluge settled down. With him remained one of his companions, Lady Seagrass, who had taken a liking to him for some reason. Reportedly, they disappeared in the waters of the Worm Gulf, which may begin to explain the significant increase in worm population observed in the vicinity. Good job, Sir Deluge! Parker Ashpaws never had much interest in returning to the Commonwealth, for he always found its bylaws so stifling, so when the rites ended he did not care at first. He soon grew very bored. The rites had given his life a certain sense of structure he had always needed. He missed the raw anticipation of it all. He decided to continue conducting the rites for the thrill of it. He bent some of the rules and replaced some of the objects, but it was close enough. His packmates, the dissidents, proved more than happy to participate, and thus they ran against each other back in Jumur Valley. Gradually, other exiles familiar with the rites, as well as those he has not heard of at all, started to take an interest. They ended up giving Barker Ashpaws some healthy competition. His old feud with Rookie Greentail ceased meaning anything to him, and he forgot all about it amid his new pursuits. Ultimately, even Barker Ashpaws, who led such a directionless existence to that point, found something of a calling through the rites. Whether he took the rites less seriously than any other exile of his time, or more, was oft debated by those who watched him work. After the cycle of the rites ceased turning, records of what happened to the Black Wagon of the Nightwings became inclusive and contradictory. Some accounts suggest that the exiles of the Nightwings who remained in the downside continued to make use of the Black Wagon as their place of shelter, and their means of travel. However, there is no record of what happened to the wagon's contents, such as the Book of Rites, or the Beyonder Crystal said to be haunted by the apparition Sandra the Unseeing. One possibility is that when the Lone Minstrel took his leave, he took the Beyonder Crystal with him, for he was thus obliged. By this line of reasoning, however, the Black Wagon itself should have been taken also. Others remain skeptical that the Beyonder Crystal ever existed, or rather that the visions that it granted were anything more than the result of an active imagination or fever dream. The Bog Dwellers of the Southern Bogs offer still another explanation, where they are familiar with binding enchantments. If there existed such an object in which the Sisters of the Ark had been expelled for more than 800 years, then the enchantment could have expired along with the light of the stars. What this would have meant for Sandra and the Beyonders is difficult to say for certain. Other than that, it may have meant that they were finally released. Nevertheless, the fates of Sandra and the Beyonder Crystal remains unknown. Yet those of the exiles of the Nightwings who claim to have seen this apparition all spoke of her with degrees of reverence, perhaps a little fear. The imp called Tizo was the first of his kind to achieve liberty through the rites. While he was not the only imp trained in the ways of the scribes, imps are native to the downside, and thus care not for traveling abroad. This made them useful to triumvirates. Yet Tizo had a different calling, and the Nightwings believed that he too could play a key in part of Wolfred Sandalwood's plan. During the night of the scribe's return, he stood out to the populace as something of a miracle. They only heard of the downside's imps before from legends of Hope the Swallow. Afterwards, he became something of an icon, representing both the fall of the Commonwealth and the beginning of a new era. He would visit his friend Zay at every opportunity. She was among the few who could constantly interpret what he meant, and they were always close since they first met. Wolfred Sandalwood would sometimes send him little gifts all the way from the downside. Despite the insurmountable distance between them, their friendship proved more than resilient. Tizo often missed his interactions with the reader of the Nightwings. They had quickly built quite the rapport back in the downside. And Tizo would often express wistful gratitude for all his time conducting the rites along the Nightwings, who made such sacrifices for him. Other than that, Tizo was diligent about his role of something of a living artifact, and helped interpret for the messenger imps that relayed news to and from the downside. Despite having earned significant celebrity, he never let it go to his head. Although he did take full advantage of his access to the Sarian Union's fishing industry. Aw, Tizo. After the Shimmer Pool closed for what would be the last time, Orlek looked around him in the flickering light of the Nightwing's still burning pyre. He then turned towards the fall of Solium and looked up towards the black starless sky. He cursed the 8 scribes, then one after the other. After that, he strode forward, towards the waters coursing from the side of Mount Alodial, and without hesitating, he cast himself down. Orlek's body was never recovered. The drop from Mount Alodial does not appear survivable, though Orlek did survive it once. That time, however, he was filled with fury. Such was the betrayal he had suffered when his fellow exile claimed his rightful freedom. This time, Orlek was filled with nothingness, and chose to leave the downside in one way he still knew he could. The other Nightwings who were to witness this never forgot what they saw. With the rites drawn to a close, the Slug Market's revenues fell precipitously, and Falcon Ron was forced to liquidate his assets and close up shop. Yet, as is sometimes the case with those of an entrepreneurial leaning, this time of hardship led to an epiphany, or at least a sudden change of fortune. One day, Falcon Ron had a run-in with a messenger imp bearing news from the other side. Ron gave to it one of his remaining trinkets which could not be sold. The following week, the messenger imp returned to him bearing a tidy sum of wealth, in newly minted coinage from the Sarian Union. Falcon Ron cut a long-term deal with the messenger imp then and there. Though his trade remained a grey area from the legal standpoint of the Sarian Union, the newfound fame of the downside caused Falcon Ron's goods to explode in popularity. He later signed an elaborate agreement with Big Bertrude's, and found a distribution partner on the other side, through Rookie Greentail, whose own business had expanded. Especially in the Sarian Union, Falcon Ron's goods are still known for their superior quality, though he assumes no liability for any side effects. As soon as possible after Tamitha Thane earned back her liberty, she rejoined her sisters of the High Wing remnants in the mountains north of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth believed that someone such as she could have been rehabilitated through years spent in exile. Instead, her hatred for her ancient enemies only intensified. On the night of the Scribe's return, the High Wing remnants were poised to strike the Commonwealth in a decisive blow. They have received credible intelligence about the expected positions of the Commonwealth leadership and of specific weakness in the blood-border defenses anticipated that night. After a surgical procedure, Tamitha could fly again, almost as well as prior to her exile. She insisted on spearheading the attack, with a squadron of the Harp's finest. However, just as Tamitha's squadron prepared to crash down upon its foes, she received a signal to belay the attack order, and return to the mountains. It appeared that the people of the Commonwealth were on the verge of achieving what the High-Wing remnants were never able to accomplish. Ever dutiful, Tamitha obliged. Her sense of duty took priority above all else. Soon after the fall of the Commonwealth, Tamitha attended a debriefing in which she learned her blood sister Pamitha was an accessory to the successful outcome. Tamitha was very skeptical of this, but so many of the High-Wing remnants honored Pamitha that Tamitha accepted the prevailing opinion, though grudgingly at first. A messenger imp later arrived bearing some sort of message, seemingly from Pamitha. However, Tamitha turned it away. She forever resisted the impulse to forgive. After the rise of the Sarian Union, Tamitha Thane continued to serve as a flight tactician and remained respected and feared even among her kind. However, without a war to wage, she grew more distant even than usual. The closest source surmised that her inability to reconcile with her blood sister was a heart of this, though for her part, Tamitha never once admitted to any such weakness. When the worm Sir Gilman returned to the Commonwealth, he believed that he had regained something even more important than his freedom, his honor. Gilman relinquished his knighthood and declined an opportunity to serve as a captain on the blood border. He was not interested in fighting any longer. Yet, as is sometimes the case with those such as he, a circumstance soon came about which there came a need for him to once again make use of his military training. Thankfully, however, the scribe's return ended peacefully. Gilman was on edge throughout the night, expecting violence to erupt at any moment, but the moment never came. When the matter was last put to rest, then Gilman truly knew his time as the night had ended. He declared to all those in earshot that he would never fight again. Unless, of course, there arose some other extraordinary set of circumstance, again requiring him to fight, but he certainly hoped not. He still trained regularly just in case, especially with his fleet-footed friend Rookie Greentail. He was always grateful for having studied under the reader of the Nightwings, without whom he would never have completed his penance. Because of this, and perhaps because they were on opposite sides of the world now, Gilman dedicated his life to him. By that point, he had long forgotten about his days under the leadership of Sir Deluge, his former commander. Breaking free of his abusive leadership was his first step towards gaining a bit of self-respect. Gilman never did return to his homeland of the Sea Dominion, and was content to lead a monastic life with small residence in the hills. It was just high up enough to make him keep striving to conquer his fear of heights. Other than that, an intense daily training regimen and the occasional visit from an old companion was more than enough to keep him optimistic and engaged. He knew by then that honor was not something to be won, but a contract with oneself to be renewed each day. After Rookie Greentail earned back his freedom, he returned to a lavish welcome ceremony in the Commonwealth, as was the tendency for liberated exiles. It was everything he could have hoped for, and soon he was well off, surrounded by luxury and choosing between various exciting opportunities. However, he must have given in to his better judgment, as he did end up siding with Wolfred Sandalwood's revolutionary forces as he promised. On the night of the scribe's return, Greentail was there with the others, inspiring the masses. He never looked prouder, the very image of Jamur Manymane himself. When dawn finally came and it became clear that the Commonwealth that everybody knew would be no more, he realized many new opportunities awaited. He began quite a lucrative career for himself, manufacturing and selling replica merchandise inspired by the downside. His main struggle was to meet the man. An aspect of his conscience cautioned him against making light of such a thing, but the money was too good, and soon his family was well off as he always said. He also kept in close touch with Gilman, ever the perfect practice partner. They would train together often, taking care to stay in tip-top shape as much as possible throughout the years. Greentail always did his best to keep in touch with all his many friends, and knew that he owed his fortunes to them. He made a special point of staying close with the group of friends he came to know so well during his time with the Nightwings, wherever they are. They shared a special understanding that put even Greentail at a loss for words sometimes. Several exiles of the Nightwings cared more for the plan of Sandalwood than to return home from the downside. The crone called Big Bertrude was a prime example. She had found a suitable environment to live, within the dismal region of Flagging Hands. There she had built up a thriving place of business known to many exiles of the land. With the rites having ended, she returned to her preoccupations, working away almost as though nothing had happened. When one gets to be more than 400 years of age, perhaps that even monumental events such as the culmination of the rites or the collapse of the Commonwealth are seen as trifling matters. Much of her effort was doubtless due to the influence of Sandalwood, someone whom she had admired now for decades. He had made clear that he could not requite her feelings for him, but what could have been a hurtful dismissal only led to a deeper understanding between them. She maintained an unlikely kinship with the harp Pamitha Thane, whom she had known during their time together on the Nightwings. They each had different strategies for dealing with life's day-to-day annoyances, a subject that they both found vital if not fascinating to no end. By and large, Bertrude kept focused on her work, whether casting small enchantments or imbuing talismans. The work brought her a sense of purpose, she would say. In the Commonwealth, such services were strictly forbidden, but in the downside, there was a real need for simple luxuries, which the competing slug market could not always provide. Thus did Big Bertrude continue to live up to her name, and the tales of her days with the Nightwings made her that much more of a living legend. After the cycle of the rite ceased turning, the lone minstrel bade the remaining Nightwings take the Black Wagon and seek their fortunes elsewhere in the downside. Their parting was heartfelt but brief. He remained there at the summit of Mount Elodial with Celeste, where the two of them would chronicle the final outcome of the cycle. Neither Tarek nor Celeste would ever be seen again. We know all of this now through song attributed to them. Some claim these songs originated in the taverns of the Sarian Union, and merely were imbued with weight of folklore. However, exiles liberated from the downside corroborated each other's claims at having met this duo that presided over the liberation rites. Another folktale suggests these minstrels were heralds of the scribes. Having fulfilled their obligations, they departed the world we know and rejoined their patrons. One of their famous songs describes another simpler outcome, that the two gave up their duties to the rites in favor of a life that they could share together. In any case, they are likely to remain the subject of such verses and such songs, for it was they who watched over the rites and ushered in our times. When the cycle of the rite ceased turning, Volfred Sandalwood turned toward the starless skies and closed his eyes and prayed. It was all that he could do at the stage of his plan. He aspired to assemble with liberated exiles representing each of the 8 ethnic groups composing the population of the Commonwealth. They would stand together as a vision of the 8 scribes' return, inspiring the masses to embrace an older set of values, from before the Commonwealth had tightened its grip. With the rites ending sooner than expected, this ideal scenario became impossible. Sandalwood's own freedom, for instance, was now forfeit, yet the plan did have contingencies. Fortunately, most of those contingencies did not prove necessary. Word reached him that on the night of the scribe's return, his fellow liberated Nightwings stood together and their voices echoed through the streets. These former exiles, who ought to have disappeared into the ranks of the Commonwealth's own leaderships, now stood united with its people who poured from their homes in solidarity. It was imperative to Sandalwood that this stand against the Commonwealth be peaceful in its nature. An overwhelming show of popular support would be more than enough. Ensuring this was his priority, and in the end, the result was self-evident: the plan's goal had been achieved. Sandalwood kept busy after that as much as possible, providing counsel from afar to those who would be at the forefront of the birth of the Sarian Union. Of course, being stranded in the downside meant that there was only so much he could do. Resting assured that the future of the nation was in capable hands, he turned his attention to the remaining exiles of the downside. They might never return to that new nation, but at least they could experience its triumphs and its struggles in some vicarious way. So he took to his old work, writing and printing. As literacy began to spread throughout the Sarian Union, so too did the exiles of the downside take to it. For his part, Sandalwood helped to teach as many as he could. More than that, he provided material to read, a semi-annual report about the latest events both in the Sarian Union and the downside. The periodical gave many exiles something to look forward to. He welcomed the company of the reader of the Nightwings at every opportunity, and counted him a trusted friend and a keen editor. As Volfred Sandalwood gained fame throughout this land for all his sacrifices and his contributions, it is said that he remained steadfast about 2 things. The first was that the cause itself ought to remain in focus, the freedom that the people had achieved. It was a gift to be cherished, a set of values that needed to be nurtured. The second point he made was that he himself had little to do with this outcome. He would often praise the exiles of the Nightwings who stood with him, each in turn by name. He never forgot any of them. One day, to commemorate his birthday, the people of the Sarian Union unveiled a monument depicting him and the Nightwings as imagined in their prime. While Sandalwood did not learn of it until much later, it is said that he was moved to tears then by the gesture. It has since ensured that those of us with memories more fallible than that of Sandalwood likewise remember the achievements of his fellow former exiles and our cause. After his liberation, Hedwyn was instrumental in the events leading to the fall of the Commonwealth, and was vital to the outcome of the plan. The peaceful outcome of the scribe's return was attributed to several key factors. One of them was the underlying ambition of the plan itself. Another was Hedwyn's visibility among the people in the streets, identified to be a liberated exile who was believed to be Golgolothanian reborn. More importantly, however, was that one of the winged harps of the Highwing remnants accompanied him. She was later identified as Fikani Shang. Their bond was symbolic of what was at stake that night, and proved vital to the peace that followed. In all his days as a leader in the Sarian Union, Hedwyn oft confided in his friend Jodariel. Despite her intense manner, there was no one whom he trusted in more times when circumspection was required. Hedwyn would often think back about the vow he made at the beginning of his quest for freedom. Although he cherished all the friendships he made, he had pledged to Jodariel, Rookie Greentail, and the Reader of the Nightwings that they might all be free again together. He had broken that vow, for in the end not all of them were able to return. A terrible guilt over this darkened his mood for a time. However, the others whom he still knew lifted his spirits, much like he had often lifted theirs. All of the Nightwings knew the stakes. While the others who stood with the Nightwings were not all able to remain in contact, thus, Hedwyn thought of each of them often, and so in turn they did oft think of him. There is one more account which warrants mention. The Nightwings conducted the rites under the guidance of a reader. Little is known of him. However, some accounts of him begin to paint a picture. We know he was of common birth, weak-framed though raised with a penchant for learning. The journey to the downside left him close to death. It was then that the Nightwings found him. They brought him from the brink, he showed them the path. He pressed onward with the others. He made a vow to help his friends be free. Thus did the cycle of the rites commence its final turns. When the final rite arrived, the reader's freedom was at stake. In the end, however, he remained in exile. From that point on, accounts of him diverge. It is said the voice which troubled him he never heard again. Some say he helped improve the lives of other downside exiles, though whether that is true only he knows. Someday perhaps the reader's own star shall emerge, then it shall pierce the dark of night in all its brilliant glory. Until such time and ever after, all of us give thanks.
Their journey began on a barren waste where the reader arrived, afraid and alone. When he arrived, the book of rites awakened the Nightwings and ignited the flame. They follow the stars bound together, hands in our brain till the end.
I'm really sorry, guys.
Sing of the last of the Nightwings who have
All the emotion up to this point,
go.
everything we've gone through all these weeks. I'm sorry it's all pouring out.
Hedwyn prevailed and strode the path that his heart laid before him. He has found his way home.
Well,
Captain Joe Dariel, mother to many
That
foundling,
was another masterpiece from Supergiant Games.
the way home.
It's so fucking rare that we have developers like these.
Proved his worth and returned to his family.
That time and time again create pieces of work such as Pyre, Transistor, Bastion, games that challenge everything else out there. You'd think this was just a simple sports game of wizard ball, but Supergiant has a fucking talent for writing games.
The moon-touched girl hears the scribes in the world all around her. They have guided her home. Tizo prevailed, first of his lowly kind, to ascend from the downside. He has found a new home. Sir Gilman the Bold, ever in his quest, finding honor and glory, he has found his way home. Amitha Thane, born on guilty wings, ever seeking forgiveness, she remains till the end. They follow the stars bound together, strands in a brain
The bog dweller Gertrude kept their foes at bay with her finest enchantments. She remained till the end. The reader at last made the night wings whole, having bound them together. He remained till the end. They follow the stars, bound together, strands in a braid till the end. They follow the stars, bound together, strands in a braid till the end. Now at the end, as we bid farewell and return to the stars,
Eric,
we shall find a way home.
Celeste.
We shall find our way home. We shall find our way home.
When the stars align, the right shall come to bear. Illuminate the sign.
Is that a library?
The exiles shall
That's a fucking library.
all are not the same, but three shall be as one. Freedom in the flame. The end has just begun. Strands may break along.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining us in this long journey. If you enjoyed this entire series of Pyre, like and subscribe so we could grow our channel together. I thank each and every one of you for joining us along. Once again, my name is Nez, and thanks for watching. See you all in the next series. Bye, everyone.